Believe that life is worth living, and your belief will help create the fact. The art of being wise is the art of knowing what to overlook. The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes. The greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. If you want a quality, act as if you already had it. Common sense and a sense of humor are the same thing, moving at different speeds. A sense of humor is just common sense, dancing. To improve the golden moment of opportunity, and catch the good that is within our reach, is the great art of life. Seek out that particular mental attribute which makes you feel most deeply and vitally alive, along with which comes the inner voice which says, "This is the real me," and when you have found that attitude, follow it. Act as if what you do makes a difference. It does. Happiness comes of the capacity to feel deeply, to enjoy simply, to think freely, to risk life, to be needed. Which give happiness. Thomas Jefferson. We never enjoy perfect happiness. Our most fortunate successes are mingled with sadness. Some anxieties always perplex the reality of our satisfaction. Whenever you're in conflict with someone, there is one factor that can make the difference between damaging your relationship and deepening it. That factor is attitude. We are all ready to be savage in some cause. The difference between a good man and a bad one is the choice of the cause. Why should we think upon things that are lovely? Because thinking determines life. It is a common habit to blame life upon the environment. Environment modifies life but does not govern life. The soul is stronger than its surroundings. It is our attitude at the beginning of a difficult task which, more than anything else, will affect its successful outcome. The greatest use of a life is to spend it on something that will outlast it. There is only one thing a philosopher can be relied upon to do, and that is to contradict other philosophers. No matter how full a reservoir of maxims one may possess, and no matter how good one's sentiments may be, if one has not taken advantage of every concrete opportunity to act, one's character may remain entirely unaffected for the better. A great many people think they are thinking when they are merely rearranging their prejudices. It is only by risking our persons from one hour to another that we live at all. And often enough our faith beforehand in an uncertified result is the only thing that makes the result come true. To be radical, an empiricism must neither admit into its constructions any element that is not directly experienced, nor exclude from them any element that is directly experienced. An idea, to be suggestive, must come to the individual with the force of revelation. Human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind. The deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. There is but one cause of human failure, and that is man's lack of faith in his true self. The sway of alcohol over mankind is unquestionably due to its power to stimulate the mystical faculties of human nature, usually crushed to earth by the cold facts and dry criticisms of the sober hour. If merely feeling good could decide, drunkenness would be the supremely valid human experience. Faith means belief in something concerning which doubt is theoretically possible. If you care enough for a result, you will most certainly attain it. Acceptance of what has happened is the first step to overcoming the consequences of any misfortune. Begin to be now what you will be hereafter. To change one's life, start immediately. Do it flamboyantly. The aim of a college education is to teach you to know a good man when you see one. Let everything you do be done as if it makes a difference. Everybody should do at least 2 things each day that he hates to do, just for practice. Action may not bring happiness, but there is no happiness without action. Whatever universe a professor believes in must at any rate be a universe that lends itself to lengthy discourse. A universe definable in 2 sentences is something for which the professorial intellect has no use. No faith in anything of that cheap kind. We don't laugh because we're happy because we laugh. Man can alter his life by altering his thinking. The I think, which Kant said must be able to accompany all my objects, is the I breathe, which actually does accompany them. To study the abnormal is the best way of understanding the normal. The world we see that seems so insane is the result of a belief system that is not working. To perceive the world differently, we must be willing to change our belief system, let the past slip away, expand our sense of now, and dissolve the fear in our minds. A chain is no stronger than its weakest link, and life is after all a chain. Success or failure depends more upon attitude than upon capacity. Successful men act as though they have accomplished or are enjoying something. Soon it becomes a reality. Act, look, feel successful, conduct yourself accordingly, and you will be amazed at the positive results. There is no more miserable human being than one in whom nothing is habitual but indecision. Most people never run far enough on their first wind to find out they've got a second. We have to live today by what truth we can get today and be ready tomorrow to call it falsehood. It is wrong always, everywhere, and for everyone, to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. If you believe that feeling bad or worrying long enough will change a past or future event, then you are residing on another planet with a different reality system. There is an organic affinity between joyousness and tenderness, and their companionship in the saintly life need in no way occasion surprise. It is well for the world that in most of us, by the age of 30, the character has set like plaster, and will never soften again. If any organism fails to fulfill its potentialities, it becomes sick. An act has no ethical quality whatever unless it be chosen out of several all equally possible. As a rule, we disbelieve all the facts and theories for which we have no use. The hell to be endured hereafter, of which theology tells, is no worse than the hell we make for ourselves in this world by habitually fashioned our characters in the wrong way. Our errors are surely not such awfully solemn things. In a world where we are so certain to incur them in spite of all our caution, a certain lightness of heart seems healthier than this excessive nervousness on their behalf. Could the young but realize how soon they will become mere walking bundles of habits, they would give more heed to their conduct while in the plastic state. Compared to what we ought to be, we are half awake. If the grace of God miraculously operates, it probably operates through the subliminal door. Do something every day for no other reason than you would rather not do it, so that when the hour of dire need draws nigh, it may find you not unnerved and untrained to stand the test. One hearty laugh together will bring enemies into a closer communion of heart than hours spent on both sides in inward wrestling with the mental demon of uncharitable feeling. Nothing is so fatiguing as the eternal hanging on of an uncompleted task. Be willing to have it so. Acceptance of what has happened is the first step to overcoming the consequences of any misfortune. Action seems to follow feeling, but really action and feeling go together, and by regulating the action, which is under the more direct control of the will, we can indirectly regulate the feeling, which is not. Great emergencies and crises show us how much greater our vital resources are than we had supposed. Truth lives, in fact, for the most part on a credit system. Our thoughts and beliefs pass, so long as nothing challenges them, just as banknotes pass so long as nobody refuses them. Metaphysics means nothing but an unusually obstinate effort to think clearly. There must be something solemn, serious, and tender about any attitude which we denominate religious. If glad, it must not grin or snicker; if sad, it must not scream or curse. This life is worth living, we can say, since it is what we make it. Is life worth living? It all depends on the liver. I don't sing because I'm happy because I sing. When you have to make a choice and don't make it, that is in itself a choice. Every man who possibly can should force himself to a holiday of a full month in a year, whether he feels like taking it or not. Many people think they are thinking when they are merely rearranging their prejudices. The world is all the richer for having a devil in it, so long as we keep our foot upon his neck. In the dim background of mind we know what we ought to be doing, but somehow we cannot start. The best argument I know for an immortal life is the existence of a man who deserves one. The community stagnates without the impulse of the individual. The impulse dies away without the sympathy of the community. A man has as many social selves as there are individuals who recognize him. To be conscious means not simply to be, but to be reported, known, to have awareness of one's being added to that being. Knowledge about life is one thing, effective occupation of a place in life, with its dynamic currents passing through your being, is another. We are doomed to cling to a life even while we find it unendurable. Genius means little more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way. Our faith is faith in someone else's faith, and in the greatest matters this is most the case. Man lives for science as well as bread. Those thoughts are truth which guide us to beneficial interaction with sensible particulars as they occur, whether they copy these in advance or not. What every genuine philosopher, every genuine man, in fact, craves most is praise, although the philosophers generally call it recognition. We never fully grasp the import of any true statement until we have a clear notion of what the opposite untrue statement would be. The ideas gained by men before they are 25 are practically the only ideas they shall have in their lives. To be a real philosopher, all that is necessary is to hate someone else's type of thinking. Our esteem for facts has not neutralized in us all religiousness. It is itself almost religious. Our scientific temper is devout. Our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, their life potential forms of consciousness entirely different. How to gain, how to keep, how to recover happiness is in fact for most men at all times the secret motive of all they do, and of all they are willing to endure. The God whom science recognizes must be a God of universal laws exclusively, a God who does a wholesale, not a retail business. He cannot accommodate his processes to the convenience of individuals. Pure experience is the name I gave to the immediate flux of life which furnishes the material to our later reflection with its conceptual categories. Individuality is founded in feeling, and the recesses of feeling, the darker, blinder strata of character, are the only places in the world in which we catch real fact in the making, and directly perceive how events happen, and how work is actually done. To spend life for something which outlasts it. Where quality is the thing sought after, the thing of supreme quality is cheap, whatever the price one has to pay for it. The greatest enemy of any one of our truths may be the rest of our truths. The history of philosophy is to a great extent that of a certain clash of human temperaments. Whenever two people meet there are really 6 people present. There is each man as he sees himself, each man as the other person sees him, and each man as he really is. If the searching of our heart and reins be the purpose of this human drama, then what is sought seems to be what effort we can make. He who can make none is but a shadow, he who can make much is a hero. If this life be not a real fight, in which something is eternally gained, it is no better than a game of private theatricals from which one may withdraw at will. If this life be not a real fight, in which something is eternally gained for the universe by success, it is no better than a game of private theatricals from which one may withdraw at will. But it feels like a real fight. I do not see how it is possible that creatures in such different positions and with such different powers as human individuals are, should have exactly the same functions, nor should we be expected to work out identical solutions. Each, from his peculiar angle of observation, takes in a certain sphere of fact and trouble, which each must deal with in a unique manner. It is our attitude at the beginning of a difficult undertaking which, more than anything else, will determine its successful outcome. Our civilization is founded on the shambles, and every individual existence goes out in a lonely spasm of helpless agony. If you protest, my friend, wait till you arrive there yourself. Thus the sovereign voluntary path to cheerfulness, if cheerfulness be lost, is to sit up cheerfully and to act and speak as if cheerfulness were already there. The deepest principle of human nature is the craving to be appreciated. The exclusive worship of the bitch goddess success is our national disease. When you have to make a choice and don't make it, that in itself is a choice. To make our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy, we must make automatic and habitual, as early as possible, as many useful actions as we can, and guard against the growing into ways that are likely to be disadvantageous to us, as we should guard against the plague. Fatalism, whose solving word in all crises of behavior is "all striving is vain," will never reign supreme, for the impulse to take life strivingly is indestructible in the race. Moral creeds which speak to that impulse will be widely successful in spite of inconsistency, vagueness, and shadowy determination of expectancy. Man needs a rule for his will, and will invent one if one be not given him. Psychology is the science of mental life, both of its phenomena and their conditions. The most violent revolutions in an individual's beliefs leave most of his old order standing. Time and space, cause and effect, nature and history, and one's own biography remain untouched. New truth is always a go-between, a smoother over of transitions. It marries old opinion to new fact so as ever to show a minimum of jolt, a maximum of continuity. A cowboy is a man with guts and a horse. The faith circle is so congruous with human nature that the only explanation of the veto that intellectualists pass upon it must be sought in the offensive character to them of the faiths of certain concrete persons. I now perceive one immense omission in my psychology. The deepest principle of human nature is the craving to be appreciated. If you want a quality, act as if you already had it. Try the as if technique. Get but that peace of God which passeth understanding, and the questions of the understanding will cease from puzzling and pedantic scruples be at rest. Genius means little more than the faculty of perceiving in an inhabitual way. A great many people think they are thinking when they are rearranging their prejudices. What the whole community comes to believe in grasps the individual as in a vice. In the deepest heart of all of us there is a corner in which the ultimate mystery of things works sadly. The greatest discovery of the 19th century was not in the realm of the physical sciences, but the power of the subconscious mind touched by faith. Any individual can tap into an eternal reservoir of power that will enable them to overcome any problem that may arise. All weaknesses can be overcome: bodily healing, financial independence, spiritual awakening, and prosperity beyond your wildest dreams. This is the superstructure of happiness. At bottom, the whole concern of religion is with the manner of our acceptance of the universe. The selfsame atoms which, chaotically dispersed, made the nebula, now, jammed and temporarily caught in peculiar positions, form our brains, and the evolution of brains, if understood, would be simply the account of how the atoms came to be so caught and jammed. Oh my Bergson, You are a magician, and your book is a marvel, a real wonder in the history of philosophy. In finishing it I found such a flavor of persistent euphony, as of a rich river that never foamed or ran thin, but steadily and firmly proceeded with its banks full to the brim. Our life is always deeper than we know, is always more divine than it seems, and hence we are able to survive degradations and despairs which otherwise must engulf us. It seems the natural thing for us to listen whilst the Europeans talk. No more fiendish punishment could be devised, were such a thing physically possible, than that one should be turned loose in society and remain absolutely unnoticed. The man who knows governments most completely is he who troubles himself least about a definition which shall give their essence. Enjoying an intimate acquaintance with all their particularities in turn, he would naturally regard an abstract conception in which these were unified as a thing more misleading than enlightening. It is as if there were in the human consciousness a sense of reality, a feeling of objective presence, a perception of what we may call something there, more deep and more general than any of the special and particular senses by which the current psychology supposes existent realities to be originally revealed. When happiness is actually in possession, the thought of evil can no more acquire the feeling of reality than the thought of good can gain reality when melancholy rules. To the man actively happy, from whatever cause, evil simply cannot then and there be believed in. Truth, as any dictionary will tell you, is a property of certain of our ideas. It means their agreement, as falsity means their disagreement, with reality. Faith branches off the highroad before reason begins. To give up pretensions is as blessed a relief as to get them ratified. Here is very little difference between one person and another, but what little difference there is very important. Religion shall mean for us the feelings, acts and experiences of individual men in their solitude. Real culture lives by sympathies and admirations, not by dislikes and disdains. Under all misleading wrappings it pounces unerringly upon the human core. To change one's life, A. Start immediately, B. Do it flamboyantly, C. No exceptions, never suffer an exception to occur till the new habit is securely rooted. Objective evidence and certitude are doubtless very fine ideals to play with, but where on this moonlit and dream-visited planet are they found? Action and feeling go together, and by regulating the action, we can directly regulate the feeling. Belief is desecrated when given to unproved and unquestioned statements for the solace and private pleasure of the believer. It is wrong always, everywhere, and for every one, to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. Modern man has not ceased to be credulous. The need to believe haunts him. Cramming seeks to stamp things in by intense application immediately before the ordeal. But a thing thus learned can form but few associations. If we claim only reasonable probability, it will be as much as men who love the truth can ever at any given moment hope to have within their grasp. A good hypothesis in science must have other properties than those of the phenomenon it is immediately invoked to explain, otherwise it is not prolific enough. If I should throw down 1,000 beans at random upon a table, I could doubtless, by eliminating a sufficient number of them, leave the rest in almost any geometrical pattern you might propose to me, and you might then say that that pattern was the thing prefigured beforehand, and that the other beans were mere irrelevance and packing material. Our dealings with nature are just like this. You must bring out of each word its practical cash value, set it at work within the stream of your experience. The war for our Union, with all the constitutional issues which it settled, and all the military lessons which it gathered in, has throughout its dilatory length but one meaning in the eyes of history. It freed the country from the social plague which until then had made political development impossible in the United States. More and more, as the years pass, does the meaning stand forth as the sole meaning. When a superior intellect and a psychopathic temperament coalesce in the same individual, we have the best possible condition for the kind of effective genius that gets into the biographical dictionaries. Every sort of energy and endurance, of courage and capacity for handling life's evils, is set free in those who have religious faith. What excites and interests the looker-on at life, what the romances and the statues celebrate, and the grim civic monuments remind us of, is the everlasting battle of the powers of light with those of darkness, with heroism reduced to its bare chance, yet ever and anon snatching victory from the jaws of death. Democracy is still upon its trial. The civic genius of our people is its only bulwark. Faith means belief in something concerning which doubt is still theoretically possible. Faith is the readiness to act in a cause the prosperous issue of which is not certified to us in advance. All natural goods perish. Riches take wings, fame is a breath, love is a cheat, youth and health and pleasure vanish. Truths emerge from facts, but they dip forward into facts again and add to them, which facts again create or reveal new truth. The word is indifferent, and so on indefinitely. The facts themselves meanwhile are not true. They simply are. Truth is the function of the beliefs that start and terminate among them. The attitude of unhappiness is not only painful, it is mean and ugly. What can be more base and unworthy than the pining, puling, mumping mood, no matter by what outward ills it may have been engendered? What is more injurious to others? What less helpful as a way out of the difficulty? It but fastens and perpetuates the trouble which occasioned it, and increases the total evil of the situation. At all costs, then, we ought to reduce the sway of that mood, we ought to scout it in ourselves and others, and never show it tolerance. A little cooling down of animal excitability and instinct, a little loss of animal toughness, a little irritable weakness and descent of the pain threshold, will bring the worm at the core of all our usual springs of delight into full view, and turn us into melancholy metaphysicians. Hardly ever can a youth transferred to the society of his betters unlearn the nasality and other vices of speech bred in him by the associations of his growing years. Hardly ever, indeed, no matter how much money there be in his pocket, can he ever learn to dress like a gentleman born. The merchants offer their wares as eagerly to him as to the veriest swell, but he simply cannot buy the right things. There is no being capable of a spiritual life who does not have within him a jungle, where the wolf constantly howls and the obscene bird of night chatters endlessly. We are all potentially such sick men. The sanest and best of us are of one clay with lunatics and prison inmates. And whenever we feel this, such a sense of the vanity of our voluntary career comes over us, that all our morality appears as a plaster hiding a sore it can never cure, and all our well-doing as the hollowest substitute for that well-being that our lives ought to be grounded in, but alas, are not so. For morality life is a war, and the service of the highest is a sort of cosmic patriotism which also calls for volunteers. If any one phrase could gather its, religion's, universal message, that phrase would be, all is not vanity in this universe, whatever the appearances may suggest. The philosophy which is so important in each of us is not a technical matter, it is our more or less dumb sense of what life honestly and deeply means. It is only partly got from books, it is our individual way of just seeing and feeling the total push and pressure of the cosmos. Regarding mutual tolerance, it is negative in one sense, but positive in another. It absolutely forbids us to be forward in pronouncing on the meaninglessness of forms of existence other than our own, and it commands us to tolerate, respect, and indulge those whom we see harmlessly interested and happy in their own ways, however unintelligible these may be to us. Hands off. Religion is the attempt to be in harmony with an unseen order of things. The teachers of this country, one may say, have its future in their hands. Much of what we call evil is due entirely to the way men take the phenomenon. It can so often be converted into a bracing and tonic good by a simple change of the sufferer's inner attitude from one of fear to one of fight. Its sting can so often depart and turn into a relish when, after vainly seeking to shun it, we agree to face about and bear it. We, the lineal representatives of the successful enactors of one scene of slaughter after another, must, whatever more pacific virtues we may also possess, still carry about with us, ready at any moment to burst into flame, the smoldering and sinister traits of character by means of which they lived through so many massacres, harming others, but themselves unharmed. There's nothing so absurd that if you repeat it often enough, people will believe it. When we of the so-called better classes are scared as men were never scared in history at material ugliness and hardship. When we put off marriage until our house can be artistic, and quake at the thought of having a child without a bank account and doomed to manual labor. It is time for thinking men to protest against so unmanly and irreligious a state of opinion. Men's activities are occupied in two ways, in grappling with external circumstances and in striving to set things at one in their own topsy-turvy mind. Smitten as we are with the vision of social righteousness, a God indifferent to everything but adulation, and full of partiality for his individual favorites, lacks an essential element of largeness. I know that you, ladies and gentlemen, have a philosophy, each and all of you, and that the most interesting and important thing about you is the way in which it determines the perspective in your several worlds. As there is no worse lie than a truth misunderstood by those who hear it, so reasonable arguments, challenges to magnanimity, and appeals to sympathy or justice are folly when we are dealing with human crocodiles and boa constrictors. Give up the feeling of responsibility, let go your hold, resign the care of your destiny to higher powers. Be genuinely indifferent as to what becomes of it all, and you will find not only that you gain a perfect inward relief, but often also, in addition, the particular goods you sincerely thought you were renouncing. The further limits of our being plunge, it seems to me, into an altogether other dimension of existence from the sensible and merely understandable world. Name it the mystical region, or the supernatural region, whichever you choose. So far as our ideal impulses originate in this region, and most of them do originate in it, for we find them possessing us in a way for which we cannot articulately account, we belong to it in a more intimate sense than that in which we belong to the visible world, for we belong in the most intimate sense wherever our ideals belong. Compared to what we ought to be, we are only half awake. We are making use of only a small part of our physical and mental resources. Stating the thing broadly, the human individual thus lives far within his limits. He possesses power of various sorts which he habitually fails to use. Failure, then, failure. So the world stamps us at every turn. We strew it with our blunders, our misdeeds, our lost opportunities, with all the memorials of our inadequacy to our vocation. And with what a damning emphasis does it then blot us out. No easy fine, no mere apology or formal expiation, will satisfy the world's demands, but every pound of flesh exacted is soaked with all its blood. The subtlest forms of suffering known to man are connected with the poisonous humiliations incidental to these results. Footnotes: little dogs yapping at the heels of the text. The most violent revolutions in an individual's beliefs leave most of his old order standing. Time and space, cause and effect, nature and history, and one's own biography remain untouched. New truth is always a go-between, a smoother over of transitions. It marries old opinion to new fact so as ever to show a minimum of jolt, a maximum of continuity. We, read in the bystander's eyes the success or failure of our own conduct. Humanism is not a single hypothesis or theorem, and it dwells on no new facts. It is rather a slow shifting in the philosophic perspective, making things appear as from a new center of interest or point of sight. Despair lames most people, but it wakes others fully up. It is only in the lonely emergencies of life that our creed is tested, then routine maxims fail, and we fall back on our gods. A Beethoven string quartet is truly, as someone has said, a scraping of horses' tails on cats' bowels, and may be exhaustively described in such terms. But the application of this description in no way precludes the simultaneous applicability of an entirely different description. Religious awe is the same organic thrill which we feel in a forest at twilight, or in a mountain gorge. As a rule, reading fiction is as hard to me as trying to hit a target by hurling feathers at it. I need resistance to celebrate. So with the man who has daily inured himself to habits of concentrated attention, energetic volition, and self-denial in unnecessary things. He will stand like a tower when everything rocks around him, and when his softer fellow mortals are winnowed like chaff in the blast. Let anyone try, I will not say to arrest, but to notice or to attend to, the present moment of time. One of the most baffling experiences occurs. Where is it, this present? It has melted in our grasp, fled ere we could touch it, gone in the instant of becoming. History is a bath of blood. The first thing the intellect does with an object is to class it along with something else. But any object that is infinitely important to us and awakens our devotion feels to us also as if it must be sui generis and unique. Probably a crab would be filled with a sense of personal outrage if it could hear us class it without ado or apology as a crustacean, and thus dispose of it. I am no such thing, it would say, I am myself, myself alone. Impulse without reason is not enough, and reason without impulse is a poor makeshift. I will act as if I do make a difference. These healers, my intellect has been unable to assimilate their theories, but their facts are patent and startling, and anything that interferes with the multiplication of such facts, and with our freest opportunity of observing and studying them, will, I believe, be a public calamity. 99/100ths or, possibly, 999,000ths of our activity is purely automatic and habitual, from our rising in the morning to our lying down each night. The deepest hunger in human beings is the desire to be appreciated. I wished by treating psychology like a natural science, to help her become one. Experience, as we know, has a way of boiling over, and making us correct our present formulas. Man, biologically considered, is simply the most formidable of all beasts of prey, and, indeed, the only one that preys systematically on its own kind. If evolution and the survival of the fittest be true at all, the destruction of prey and of human rivals must have been among the most important. It is just because human bloodthirstiness is such a primitive part of us that it is so hard to eradicate, especially when a fight or a hunt is promised as part of the fun. It is true that so far as wealth gives time for ideal ends and exercise to ideal energies, wealth is better than poverty and ought to be chosen. But wealth does this in only a portion of the actual cases. Elsewhere the desire to gain wealth and the fear to lose it are our chief breeders of cowardice and propagators of corruption. There must be thousands of conjunctures in which a wealth-bound man must be a slave, whilst a man for whom poverty has no terrors becomes a freeman. The thinker philosophizes as the lover loves. Even were the consequences not only useless but harmful, he must obey his impulse. As Charles Lamb says, there is nothing so nice as doing good by stealth and being found out by accident. So I now say it is even nicer to make heroic decisions and to be prevented by circumstances beyond your control from ever trying to execute them. The belief in free will is not in the least incompatible with the belief in providence, provided you do not restrict the providence to fulminating nothing but fatal decrees. The man whose acquisitions stick is the man who is always achieving and advancing whilst his neighbors, spending most of their time in relearning what they once knew but have forgotten, simply hold their own. Our ideas must agree with realities, be such realities concrete or abstract, be they facts or be they principles, under penalty of endless inconsistency and frustration. The general law is that no mental modification ever occurs which is not accompanied or followed by a bodily change. To some of us the thought of God is like a sort of quiet music playing in the background of the mind. From a pragmatic point of view, the difference between living against a background of foreignness, an indifferent universe, and one of intimacy, a benevolent universe, means the difference between a general habit of wariness and one of trust. Millions of items in the outward order are present to my senses which never properly enter into my experience. Why? Because they have no interest for me. My experience is what I agree to attend to. Only those items which I notice shape my mind, without selective interest. Experience is an utter chaos. The unrest which keeps the never-stopping clock of metaphysics going is the thought that the non-existence of this world is just as possible as its existence. So far war has been the only force that can discipline a whole community, and until an equivalent discipline is organized, I believe that war must have its way. Science herself consults her heart when she lays it down that the infinite ascertainment of fact and correction of false belief are the supreme goods for man. If you only care enough for a result, you will almost certainly attain it. Only you must, then, really wish these things, and wish them exclusively, and not wish at the same time 100 other incompatible things just as strongly. Between what a man calls me and what he simply calls mine, the line is difficult to draw. We feel and act about certain things that are ours very much as we feel and act about ourselves. An enormous mass of experience, both of homeopathic doctors and their patients, is invoked in favor of the efficacy of these remedies and doses. The war function has grasped us so far, but the constructive interests may someday seem no less imperative, and impose on the individual a hardly lighter burden. The total possible consciousness may be split into parts which coexist but mutually ignore each other. The soul is stronger than its surroundings. The power to move the world is in the subconscious mind. Let sanguine healthy-mindedness do its best with its strange power of living in the moment and ignoring and forgetting. Still the evil background is really there to be thought of, and the skull will grin in at the banquet. Instinct leads, logic does but follow. We must be careful not to confuse data with the abstractions we use to analyze them. So to feel brave, act as if we were brave, use all our will to that end, and a courage fit will very likely replace the fit of fear. Sobriety diminishes, discriminates, and says no. Drunkenness expands, unites, and says yes. Not through mere perversity do men run after it. Tension is a habit. Relaxing is a habit. Bad habits can be broken, good habits formed. We do not sing because we are happy because we sing. There can be no final truth in ethics any more than in physics, until the last man has had his experience and said his say. Man alone of all the creatures of earth can change his own pattern. Man alone is the architect of his own destiny. There is no doubt that healthy-mindedness is inadequate as a philosophical doctrine, because the evil facts which it refuses positively to account for are a genuine portion of reality, and they may after all be the best key to life's significance, and possibly the only openers of our eyes to the deepest levels of truth. If you give appreciation to people, you win their goodwill. But more important than that, practicing this philosophy has made a different person of me. The greatest discovery of the 20th century is that our attitude of mind determines our quality of life, not circumstances. There is an organic affinity between joyousness and tenderness. All religions begin with the cry help. Life shall be built in doing and suffering and creating. Success or failure depends more upon attitude than upon capacity. My thinking is first and last and always for the sake of my doing, and I can only do one thing at a time. Our beliefs are really rules for action. We must not just patch and tinker with life. We must keep renewing it. Embrace novelty and uniqueness. A winner's attitude: it may be difficult, but it's possible. A loser's attitude: it may be possible, but it's too difficult. Man can change his life simply by changing his attitude. Faith is one of the forces by which men live, and the total absence of it means collapse. Once you accept an idea, it's an idea whose time has come. Strength is a facade for the proud, weakness is a mask for the lazy. Equality is attainable as long as you are part of the majority. We hear in these days of scientific enlightenment a great deal of discussion about the efficacy of prayer. Many reasons are given why we should not pray. Others give reasons why we should pray. Very little is said of the reason we do pray. The reason is simple: we pray because we cannot help praying. Focus on increasing service. Becoming great where you are. Pile in the wood. The heat will follow. Or if the hypothesis were offered us of a world in which Messrs. Fourier's and Bellamy's and Morris's utopias should all be outdone, and millions kept permanently happy on the one simple condition that a certain lost soul on the far-off edge of things should lead a life of lonely torment, what except a specifical and independent sort of emotion can it be which would make us immediately feel, even though an impulse arose within us to clutch at the happiness so offered, how hideous a thing would be its enjoyment when deliberately accepted as the fruit of such a bargain. When a thing is new, people say, it is not true. Later, when its truth becomes obvious, they say, it is not important. Finally, when its importance cannot be denied, they say, anyway, it is not new. Selection is the very keel on which our mental ship is built. And in this case of memory its utility is obvious. If we remembered everything, we should on most occasions be as ill off as if we remembered nothing. Good humor is a philosophic state of mind. It seems to say to nature that we take her no more seriously than she takes us. I maintain that one should always talk of philosophy with a smile. Philosophy is an unusually stubborn attempt to think clearly. To suggest personal will and effort to one all-sicklied ower with the sense of irremediable impotence is to suggest the most impossible of things. What he craves is to be consoled in his very powerlessness, to feel that the spirit of the universe recognizes and secures him, all decaying and failing as he is. I am tired of the position of the dried-up critic and doubter. The believer is the true full man. From a biography of James by Robert D. Richardson. It would probably astound each of us beyond measure to be let into his neighbor's mind and to find how different the scenery was there from that of his own. Most people, probably, are in doubt about certain matters ascribed to their past. They may have seen them, may have said them, done them, or they may only have dreamed or imagined they did so. So you see that the process of education, taken in a large way, may be described as nothing but the process of acquiring ideas or conceptions. The best educated mind being the mind which has the largest stock of them, ready to meet the largest possible variety of the emergencies of life. The lack of education means only the failure to have acquired them, and the consequent liability to be floored and rattled in the vicissitudes of experience. The perfect stillness of the night was thrilled by a more solemn silence. The darkness held a presence that was all the more felt because it was not seen. I could not any more have doubted that he was there than that I was. Indeed, I felt myself to be, if possible, the less real of the two. What do believers in the Absolute mean by saving that their belief affords them comfort? They mean that since in the Absolute finite evil is overruled already, we may, therefore, whenever we wish, treat the temporal as if it were potentially the eternal. Be sure that we can trust its outcome, and, without sin, dismiss our fear and drop the worry of our finite responsibility. In short, they mean that we have a right ever and anon to take a moral holiday, to let the world wag in its own way, feeling that its issues are in better hands than ours and are none of our business. Our colleges ought to have lit up in us a lasting relish for a better kind of man, a loss of appetite for mediocrities. It does not follow, because our ancestors made so many errors of fact and mixed them with their religion, that we should therefore leave off being religious at all. By being religious we establish ourselves in possession of ultimate reality at the only points at which reality is given us to guard. Our responsible concern is with our private destiny, after all. A man with no philosophy in him is the most inauspicious and unprofitable of all possible social mates. Procrastination is attitude's natural assassin. There's nothing so fatiguing as an uncompleted task. But it is the bane of psychology to suppose that where results are similar, processes must be the same. Psychologists are too apt to reason as geometers would, if the latter were to say that the diameter of a circle is the same thing as its semicircumference, because, forsooth, they terminate in the same 2 points. Round about the accredited and orderly facts of every science there ever floats a sort of dust cloud of exceptional observations, of occurrences minute and irregular and seldom met with, which it always proves more easy to ignore than to attend to. Anyone will renovate his science who will steadily look after the irregular phenomena, and when science is renewed, its new formulas often have more of the voice of the exceptions in them than of what were supposed to be the rules. Many persons nowadays seem to think that any conclusion must be very scientific if the arguments in favor of it are derived from twitching of frogs' legs, especially if the frogs are decapitated, and that, On the other hand, any doctrine chiefly vouched for by the feelings of human beings, with heads on their shoulders, must be benighted and superstitious. Life is one long struggle between conclusions based on abstract ways of conceiving cases, and opposite conclusions prompted by our instinctive perception of them. Religion, whatever it is a man's total reaction upon life. If you say that this is absurd, that we cannot be in love with everyone at once, I merely point out to you that, as a matter of fact, certain persons do exist with an enormous capacity for friendship and for taking delight in other people's lives, and that such person know more of truth than if their hearts were not so big. The vice of ordinary Jack and Jill affection is not its intensity, but its exclusions and its jealousies. Leave those out, and you see that the ideal I am holding up before you, however impracticable today, yet contains nothing intrinsically absurd. Romeo wants Juliet as the filings want the magnet, and if no obstacles intervene he moves towards her by as straight a line as they. But Romeo and Juliet, if a wall be built between them, do not remain idiotically pressing their faces against its opposite sides like the magnet and the filings with the card. Romeo soon finds a circuitous way, by scaling the wall or otherwise, of touching Juliet's lips directly. With the filings the path is fixed, whether it reaches the end depends on accidents. With the lover it is the end which is fixed, the path may be modified indefinitely. The first thing to learn in intercourse with others is non-interference with their own particular ways of being happy, provided those ways do not assume to interfere by violence with ours. All the daily routine of life, our dressing and undressing, the coming and going from our work or carrying through of its various operations, is utterly without mental reference to pleasure and pain, except under rarely realized conditions. Compared with what we ought to be, we are only half awake. Our fires are damped, our drafts are checked. We are making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical resources. The one who thinks over his experiences most, and weaves them into systematic relations with each other, will be the one with the best memory. How can the moribund old man reason back to himself the romance, the mystery, the imminence of great things with which our old earth tingled for him in the days when he was young and well? If you wish to upset the law that all crows are black, you mustn't seek to show that no crows are. It is enough if you prove one single crow to be white. The lunatic's visions of horror are all drawn from the material of daily fact. Our civilization is founded on the shambles, and every individual existence goes out in a lonely spasm of helpless agony. There are two lives, the natural and the spiritual, and we must lose the one before we can participate in the other. We have grown literally afraid to be poor. We despise anyone who elects to be poor in order to simplify and save his inner life. If he does not join the general scramble and pant with the money-making street, we deem him spiritless and lacking in ambition. Time itself comes in drops. It is only by risking our persons from one hour to another that we live at all. The prevalent fear of poverty among the educated classes is the worst moral disease from which our civilization suffers. Pragmatism asks its usual question. Grant an idea or belief to be true, it says, what concrete difference will its being true make in anyone's actual life? How will the truth be realized? What experiences will be different from those which would obtain if the belief were false? What, in short, is the truth's cash value in experiential terms? A great nation is not saved by wars, it is saved by acts without external picturesqueness, by speaking, writing, voting reasonably, by smiting corruption swiftly, by good temper between parties, by the people knowing true men when they see them, and preferring them as leaders to rabid partisans and empty quacks. I am no lover of disorder and doubt as such. Rather I fear to lose truth by the pretension to possess it already wholly. Science, like life, feeds on its own decay. New facts burst old rules, then newly divined conceptions bind old and new together into a reconciling law. The same is true of love, and the instinctive desire to please those whom we love. The teacher who succeeds in getting herself loved by the pupils will obtain results which one of a more forbidding temperament finds it impossible to secure. Consciousness does not appear to itself chopped up in bits. Such words as chain or train do not describe it fitly as it presents itself in the first instance. It is nothing jointed, it flows. Up river or up stream are the metaphors by which it is most naturally described. In talking of it hereafter, let us call it the stream of thought, of consciousness, or of subjective life. Source of the expression, stream of consciousness. When thoughts do not neutralize an undesirable emotion, action will. Just for today I will exercise my soul in 3 ways. I will do somebody a good turn and not get found out. I will do at least 2 things I don't want to do. All of our life is but a mass of small habits, practical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual, that bear us irresistibly toward our destiny. Contemporary philosophers, even the rationalistic-minded ones, have on the whole agreed that no one has intelligibly banished the mystery of fact. How many of us persist in a precipitate course which, but for a moment of heedlessness we might never have entered upon, simply because we hate to change our minds? The perfection of rottenness. No living person is sunk so low as not to be imitated by somebody. As the brain changes are continuous, so do all these consciousnesses melt into each other like dissolving views. Properly they are but one protracted consciousness, one unbroken stream. How pleasant is the day when we give up striving to be young or slender. The emotions aren't always immediately subject to reason, but they are always immediately subject to action. There is but one unconditional commandment, to bring about the very largest total universe of good which we can see. The more rational statement is that we feel sorry because we strike, afraid because we tremble, and not that we cry, strike, or tremble because we are sorry, angry, or fearful as the case may be. Events are influenced by our very great desires. Science can tell us what exists, but to compare the worths, both of what exists and of what does not exist, we must consult not science, but what Pascal calls our heart. There can be no existence of evil as a force to the healthy-minded individual. Serious development of the personality begins at the closet door. To begin with, our knowledge grows in spots. What you first gain is probably a small amount of new information, a few new definitions, or distinctions, or points of view. But while these special ideas are being added, the rest of your knowledge stands still, and only gradually will you line up your previous opinions with the novelties I am trying to instill, and to modify to some slight degree their mass. Your mind in such processes is strained, and sometimes painfully so, between its older beliefs and the novelties which experience brings along. Let's take full advantage of this discovery. Nature in her unfathomable designs had mixed us of clay and flame, of brain and mind, that the two things hang indubitably together and determine each other's being, but how or why, no mortal may ever know. When two minds of a high order, interested in kindred subjects, come together, their conversation is chiefly remarkable for the summariness of its allusions and the rapidity of its transitions. Before one of them is half through a sentence, the other knows his meaning and replies. His mental lungs breathe more deeply, in an atmosphere more broad and vast. The first effect of the mind growing cultivated is that processes once multiple get to be performed in a single act. Lazarus has called this the progressive condensation of thought. Steps really sink from sight. An advanced thinker sees the relations of his topics as such masses and so instantaneously that when he comes to explain to younger minds it is often hard. Bowditch, who translated and annotated Laplace's Mécanique Céleste, said that whenever his author prefaced a proposition by the words "it is evident," he knew that many hours of hard study lay before him. We may answer the question, why is snow white? By saying, for the same reason that soap suds or whipped eggs are white. In other words, instead of giving the reason for a fact, we give another example of the same fact. This offering a similar instance, instead of a reason, has often been criticized as one of the forms of logical depravity in men. But manifestly it is not a perverse act of thought, but only an incomplete one. Furnishing parallel cases is the necessary first step towards abstracting the reason embedded in them all. Science as such assuredly has no authority, for she can only say what is, not what is not. Facts are the bounds of human knowledge, set for it, not by it. We want all our friends to tell us our bad qualities. It is only the particular ass that does so whom we can't tolerate. If you give appreciation to people, you win their goodwill. Spiritual energy flows in and produces effects in the phenomenal world. Act in earnest and you will become earnest in all you do. A man of sense is never discouraged by difficulties. He redoubles his industry and his diligence. He perseveres and infallibly prevails at last. Only necessity understood, and bondage to the highest is identical with true freedom. If an unusual necessity forces us onward, a surprising thing occurs. The fatigue gets worse up to a certain point, when, gradually or suddenly, it passes away and we are fresher than before. From all these facts there emerges a very simple abstract program for the teacher to follow in keeping the attention of the child. Begin with the line of his native interests, and offer him objects that have some immediate connection with these. The most natively interesting object to a man is his own personal self and its fortunes. We accordingly see that the moment a thing becomes connected with the fortunes of the self, it forthwith becomes an interesting thing. An idea will infect another with its own emotional interest when they have become both associated together into any sort of a mental total. The entire routine of our memorized acquisitions is a consequence of nothing but the law of contiguity. The words of a poem, the formulas of trigonometry, the facts of history, the properties of material things, are all known to us as definite systems or groups of objects which cohere in an order fixed by innumerable iterations, and of which any one part reminds us of the others. It is astonishing how many mental operations we can explain when we have once grasped the principles of association. We must make automatic and habitual, as early as possible, as many useful actions as we can, and as carefully guard against the growing into ways that are likely to be disadvantageous. Habit is second nature, or rather, 10 times nature. No reception without reaction, no impression without correlative expression. This is the great maxim which the teacher ought never to forget. Man, whatever else he may be, is primarily a practical being, whose mind is given him to aid in adapting him to this world's life. To know psychology, therefore, is absolutely no guarantee that we shall be good teacher. I take it that no man is educated who has never dallied with the thought of suicide. Fatalism, whose solving word in all crises of behavior is all striving is vain, will never reign supreme. For the impulse to take life strivingly is indestructible in the race. Moral creeds which speak to that impulse will be widely successful in spite of inconsistency, vagueness, and shadowy determination of expectancy. Man needs a rule for his will, and will invent one if one be not given him. We are spinning our own fates, good or evil, and never to be undone. Every smallest stroke of virtue or of vice leaves its ever so little scar. Nothing we ever do is, in strict scientific literalness, wiped out. By far the most usual way of handling phenomena so novel that they would make for a serious rearrangement of our preconceptions is to ignore them altogether, or to abuse those who bear witness for them. The difference between an interesting and a tedious teacher consists in little more than the inventiveness by which the one is able to mediate these associations and connections, and in the dullness in discovering such transitions which the other shows. If, then, you wish to ensure the interest of your pupils, there is only one way to do it, and that is to make certain that they have something in their minds to attend with when you begin to talk. That something can consist in nothing but a previous lot of ideas already interesting in themselves, and of such a nature that the incoming novel objects which you present can dovetail into them and form with them some kind of a logically associated or systematic whole. It is as important to cultivate your silence power as your word power. Considering the inner fitness of things, one would rather think that the very first act of a will endowed with freedom should be to sustain the belief in the freedom itself. The exercise of voluntary attention in the schoolroom must therefore be counted one of the most important points of training that take place there, and the first-rate teacher, by the keenness of the remoter interests which he is able to awaken, will provide abundant opportunities for its occurrence. Our volitional habits depend, then, first, on what the stock of ideas is which we have, and, second, on the habitual coupling of the several ideas with action or inaction respectively. You perceive now, my friends, what your general or abstract duty is as teachers. Although you have to generate in your pupils a large stock of ideas, any one of which may be inhibitory, yet you must also see to it that no habitual hesitancy or paralysis of the will ensues, and that the pupil still retains his power of vigorous action. Volition takes place only when there are a number of conflicting systems of ideas, and depends on our having a complex field of consciousness. In all this process of acquiring conceptions, a certain instinctive order is followed. There is a native tendency to assimilate certain kinds of conception at one age, and other kinds of conception at a later age. Be patient and sympathetic with the type of mind that cuts a poor figure in examinations. It may, in the long examination which life sets us, come out in the end in better shape than the glib and ready reproducer, its passions being deeper, its purposes more worthy, its combining power less commonplace, and its total mental output consequently more important. The art of remembering is the art of thinking. When we wish to fix a new thing in either our own mind or a pupil's, our conscious effort should not be so much to impress and retain it as to connect it with something else already there. The connecting is the thinking, and, if we attend clearly to the connection, the connected thing will certainly be likely to remain within recall. In all primary school work, the principle of multiple impressions is well recognized. Most men have a good memory for facts connected with their own pursuits. An educated memory depends on an organized system of associations, and its goodness depends on two of their peculiarities: first, on the persistency of the associations, and, second, on their number. If the topic be highly abstract, show its nature by concrete examples; if it be unfamiliar, make it figure as part of a story; if it be difficult, couple its acquisition with some prospect of personal gain. Above all things, make sure that it shall run through certain inner changes, since no unvarying object can possibly hold the mental field for long. Let your pupil wander from one aspect to another of your subject, if you do not wish him to wander from it altogether to something else. Variety and unity being the secret of all interesting talk and thought. But when all is said and done, the fact remains that some teachers have a naturally inspiring presence and can make their exercises interesting, whilst others simply cannot. And psychology and general pedagogy here confess their failure, and hand things over to the deeper spring of human personality to conduct the task. All that we need explicitly to note is that, the more the passive attention is relied on, by keeping the material interesting, and the less the kind of attention requiring effort is appealed to, the more smoothly and pleasantly the classroom work goes on. All the higher, more penetrating ideals are revolutionary. They present themselves far less in the guise of effects of past experience than in that of probable causes of future experience, factors to which the environment and the lessons it has so far taught us must learn to bend. I originally studied medicine in order to be a physiologist, but I drifted into psychology and philosophy from a sort of fatality. I never had any philosophic instruction, the first lecture on psychology I ever heard being the first I ever gave. The love of life, at any and every level of development, is the religious impulse. What holds attention determines action. Religion must be considered vindicated in a certain way from the attacks of her critics. We are stereotyped creatures, imitators and copiers of our past selves. If we take the universe of fitting, countless coats fit backs, and countless boots fit feet, on which they are not practically fitted, countless stones fit gaps in walls into which no one seeks to fit them actually. In the same way countless opinions fit realities, and countless truths are valid, though no thinker ever thinks them. Emotional occasions, especially violent ones, are extremely potent in precipitating mental rearrangements. The sudden and explosive ways in which love, jealousy, guilt, fear, remorse, or anger can seize upon one are known to everybody. And emotions that come in this explosive way seldom leave things as they found them. Evil is a disease, and worry over disease is itself an additional form of disease, which only adds to the original complaint. Organization and method mean much, but contagious human characters mean more in a university. Religious experience, as we have studied it, cannot be cited as unequivocally supporting the infinitist belief. The only thing that it unequivocally testifies to is that we can experience union with something larger than ourselves and in that union find our greatest peace. The subjectivist in morals, when his moral feelings are at war with the facts about him, is always free to seek harmony by toning down the sensitiveness of the feelings. Neither moral relations nor the moral law can swing in vacuo. Their only habitat can be a mind which feels them, and no world composed of merely physical facts can possibly be a world to which ethical propositions apply. True to her inveterate habit, rationalism reverts to principles, and thinks that when an abstraction once is named, we own an oracular solution. The instant field of the present is at all times what I call the pure experience. It is only virtually or potentially either object or subject as yet. The baby, assailed by eyes, ears, nose, skin, and entrails at once, feels it all as one great blooming, buzzing confusion. Pretend what we may, the whole man within us is at work when we form our philosophical opinions. Intellect, will, taste, and passion cooperate just as they do in practical affairs. And lucky it is if the passion be not something as petty as a love of personal conquest over the philosopher across the way. We believe as much as we can. We would believe everything if we could. Psychology is a science, and teaching is an art, and sciences never generate arts directly out of themselves. It is only the fundamental conceptions of psychology which are of real value to a teacher. Psychology ought certainly to give the teacher radical help. A rule of thinking which would absolutely prevent me from acknowledging certain kinds of truth if those truths were really there, would be an irrational rule. We have lost the power even of imagining what the ancient idealization of poverty could have meant, the liberation from material attachments, the unbribed soul, the manlier indifference, the paying our way by what we are and not by what we have, the right to fling away our life at any moment irresponsibly, the more athletic trim. In short, the moral fighting shape. If theological ideas prove to have a value for concrete life, they will be true for pragmatism, in the sense of being good for so much. How much more they are true will depend entirely on their relations to the other truths that also have to be acknowledged. It is so human a book that I don't see how belief in its divine authority can survive the reading of it. True ideas lead us into useful verbal and conceptual quarters as well as directly up to useful sensible termini. They lead to consistency, stability, and flowing human intercourse. In modern eyes, precious though wars may be, they must not be waged solely for the sake of the ideal harvest. Only when forced upon one, is a war now thought permissible. To know one thing thoroughly would be to know the universe. Since you make evil or good by your own thoughts, it is your ruling of your thoughts which proves to be your principal concern. Men are now proud of belonging to a conquering nation, and without a murmur they lay down their persons and their wealth, if by so doing they may fend off subjection. One hears of the mechanical equivalent of heat. What we now need to discover in the social realm is the moral equivalent of war, something heroic that will speak to men as universally as war does, and yet will be as compatible with their spiritual selves as war has proved itself to be incompatible. Modern war is so expensive that we feel trade to be a better avenue to plunder, but modern man inherits all the innate pugnacity and all the love of glory of his ancestors. The first lecture in psychology that I ever heard was the first I ever gave. The difference between objective and subjective extension is one of relation to a context solely. The only function that one experience can perform is to lead into another experience, and the only fulfillment we can speak of is the reaching of a certain experienced end. When one experience leads to, or can lead to, the same end as another, they agree in function. On pragmatistic principles, if the hypothesis of God works satisfactorily in the widest sense of the word, it is true. Old-fashioned determinism was what we may call hard determinism. It did not shrink from such words as fatality, bondage of the will, necessitation, and the like. Nowadays, we have a soft determinism which abhors harsh words, and, repudiating fatality, necessity, and even predetermination, says that its real name is freedom. For freedom is only necessity understood, and bondage to the highest is identical with true freedom. Ideas are so much flat psychological surface unless some mirrored matter gives them cognitive luster. This is why as a pragmatist I have so carefully posited reality ab initio, and why throughout my whole discussion, I remain an epistemologist realist. That reality is independent means that there is something in every experience that escapes our arbitrary control. If it be a sensible experience, it coerces our attention. If a sequence, we cannot invert it. If we compare two terms, we can come to only one result. There is a push, an urgency, within our very experience, against which we are on the whole powerless, and which drives us in a direction that is the destiny of our belief. Pluralism lets things really exist in the each form or distributively. Monism thinks that the all-form or collective unit form is the only form that is rational. Geniuses are commonly believed to excel other men in their power of sustained attention. But it is their genius making them attentive, not their attention making geniuses of them. Social evolution is a resultant of the interaction of two wholly distinct factors, the individual, bearing all the power of initiative and origination in his hands, and, second, the social environment with its power of adopting or rejecting both him and his gifts. Both factors are essential to change. The community stagnates without the impulse of the individual. The impulse dies away without the sympathy of the community. Philosophy is at once the most sublime and the most trivial of human pursuits. It works in the minutest crannies and it opens out the widest vistas. It bakes no bread, as has been said, but it can inspire our souls with courage. The absolute things, the last things, the overlapping things, are the truly philosophic concerns. All superior minds feel seriously about them, and the mind with the shortest views is simply the mind of the more shallow man. Essential truth, the truth of the intellectualists, the truth with no one thinking it, is like the coat that fits though no one has ever tried it on, like the music that no ear has listened to. It is less real, not more real, than the verified article, and to attribute a superior degree of glory to it seems little more than a piece of perverse abstraction worship. Far from being antecedent principles that animate the process, law, language, truth are but abstract names for its results. Better risk loss of truth than chance of error. That is your faith vetoer's exact position. He is actively playing his stake as much as the believer is. He is backing the field against the religious hypothesis, just as the believer is backing the religious hypothesis against the field. Faith is synonymous with working hypothesis. The mind, in short, works on the data it receives very much as a sculptor works on his block of stone. In a sense, the statue stood there from eternity. But there were 1,000 different ones beside it, and the sculptor alone is to thank for having extricated this one from the rest. Compared with men, it is probable that brutes neither attend to abstract characters, nor have associations by similarity. Their thoughts probably pass from one concrete object to its habitual concrete successor far more uniformly than is the case with us. In other words, their associations of ideas are almost exclusively by contiguity. So far, however, as any brute might think by abstract characters instead of by association of concretes, he would have to be admitted to be a reasoner in the true human sense. How far this may take place is quite uncertain. Since belief is measured by action, he who forbids us to believe religion to be true, necessarily also forbids us to act as we should if we did believe it to be true. The war against war is going to be no holiday excursion or camping party. We are proud of a human nature that could be so passionately extreme, but we shrink from advising others to follow the example. When you have broken the reality into concepts, you never can reconstruct it in its wholeness. Mental fire is what won't burn real sticks. Mental water is what won't necessarily, though of course it may, put out even a mental fire. The old question of whether there is design is idle. The real question is what is the world, whether or not it have a designer, and that can be revealed only by the study of all nature's particulars. What interest, zest, or excitement can there be in achieving the right way, unless we are enabled to feel that the wrong way is also a possible and a natural way, nay, more, a menacing and an imminent way? And what sense can there be in condemning ourselves for taking the wrong way, unless we need have done nothing of the sort, unless the right way was open to us as well? I cannot understand the willingness to act, no matter how we feel, without the belief that acts are really good and bad. The intellect, everywhere invasive, shows everywhere its shallowing effect. Intellectualism is the belief that our mind comes upon a world complete in itself, and has the duty of ascertaining its contents, but has no power of redetermining its character, for that is already given. What a magnificent land and race is this Britain! Everything about them is of better quality than the corresponding thing in the U.S. Yet I believe, or suspect, that ours is eventually the bigger destiny, if we can only succeed in living up to it. No bell in us tolls to let us know for certain when truth is in our grasp. Even if matter could do every outward thing that God does, the idea of it would not work as satisfactorily, because the chief call for a God on modern men's part is for a being who will inwardly recognize them and judge them sympathetically. Matter disappoints this craving of our ego, so God remains for most men the truer hypothesis, and indeed remains so for definite pragmatic reasons. Materialism means simply the denial that the moral order is eternal, and the cutting off of ultimate hopes. Spiritualism means the affirmation of an eternal moral order and the letting loose of hope. Every time a resolve or a fine glow of feeling evaporates without bearing practical fruit is worse than a chance lost. It works to hinder future resolutions and emotions from taking the normal path of discharge. There is no more contemptible type of human character than that of the nerveless sentimentalist and dreamer, who spends his life in a weltering sea of sensibility and emotion, but who never does a manly concrete deed. General skepticism is the live mental attitude of refusing to conclude. It is a permanent torpor of the will, renewing itself in detail towards each successive thesis that offers, and you can no more kill it off by logic than you can kill off obstinacy or practical joking. As long as there are postmen, life will have zest. Every way of classifying a thing is but a way of handling it for some particular purpose. Where is it, this present? It has melted in our grasp, fled ere we could touch it, gone in the instant of becoming. Truth is what will be steadily borne out by subsequent experience. To be fertile in hypotheses is the first perquisite of creativity, and to be willing to throw them away the moment experience contradicts them is the next. Out of time we cut days and nights, summers and winters. We say what each part of the sensible continuum is, and all these abstract whats are concepts. The intellectual life of man consists almost wholly in his substitution of a conceptual order for the perceptual order in which his experience originally comes. The intellectual life of man consists almost wholly in his substitution of conceptual order for the perceptual order in which his experience originally comes. Philosophy lives in words, but truth and fact well up into our lives in ways that exceed verbal formulation. There is in the living act of perception always something that glimmers and twinkles and will not be caught, and for which reflection comes too late. As I apprehend the Buddhist doctrine of karma, I agree in principle with that. I am the same personal being who in old times upon the earth had those experiences. Plasticity, then, in the wide sense of the word, means the possession of a structure weak enough to yield to an influence, but strong enough not to yield all at once. Each relatively stable phase of equilibrium in such a structure is marked by what we may call a new set of habits. We are mere bundles of habits. New habits can be launched. Do every day or two something for no other reason than its difficulty. Seize the very first possible opportunity to act on every resolution you make, and on every emotional prompting you may experience in the direction of the habits you aspire to gain. In the acquisition of a new habit, or the leaving off of an old one, we must take care to launch ourselves with as strong and decided an initiative as possible. The teacher's prime concern should be to ingrain into the pupil that assortment of habits that shall be most useful to him throughout life. Education is for behavior, and habits are the stuff of which behavior consists. Great indeed is fear, but it is not, as our military enthusiasts believe and try to make us believe, the only stimulus known for awakening the higher ranges of men's spiritual energy. The mind of your own enemy, the pupil, is working away from you, as keenly and eagerly as is the mind of the commander on the other side from the scientific general. Just what the respective enemies want and think, and what they know or do not know, are as hard things for the teachers as for the general to find out. No one sees further into a generalization than his own knowledge of detail extends. I am, myself, a very poor visualizer and find that I can seldom call to mind even a single letter of the alphabet in purely retinal terms. I must trace the letter by running my mental eye over its contour in order that the image of it shall leave any distinctness at all. An impression which simply flows in at the pupil's eyes or ears and in no way modifies his active life, is an impression gone to waste. It is physiologically incomplete. Its motor consequences are what clinch it. A remarkable parallel, which I think has never been noticed, obtains between the facts of social evolution on the one hand, and of zoological evolution as expounded by Mr. Darwin on the other. Of course, this has its good side as well as its bad one. As we become permanent drunkards by so many separate drinks, so we become saints in the moral, and authorities and experts in the practical and scientific spheres, by so many separate acts and hours of work. Let no youth have any anxiety about the upshot of his education, whatever the line of it may be. If he keep faithfully busy each hour of the working day, he may safely leave the final result to itself. All the qualities of a man acquire dignity when he knows that the service of the collectivity that owns him needs them. If proud of the collectivity, his own pride rises in proportion. No collectivity is like an army for nourishing such pride. The desire to gain wealth and the fear to lose it are our chief breeders of cowardice and propagators of corruption. That which is most personal, is most interesting. You can't outperform your self-image. In the matter of belief, we are all extreme conservatives. Once a decision is reached, stop worrying and start working. We divert our attention from disease and death as much as we can. The slaughterhouses are huddled out of sight and never mentioned, so that the world we recognize officially in literature and in society is a poetic fiction far handsomer, cleaner, and better than the world that really is. There can be no difference anywhere that does not make a difference somewhere. In this real world of sweat and dirt, it seems to me that when a view of things is noble, that ought to count as presumption against its truth, and as a philosophic disqualification. The Prince of Darkness may be a gentleman, as we are told he is, but whatever the God of earth and heaven is, he can surely be no gentleman. It is very important that teachers should realize the importance of habit. An experience, perceptual or conceptual, must conform to reality in order to be true. Owing to the fact that all experience is a process, no point of view can ever be the last one. Truth is one species of good, and not, as is usually supposed, a category distinct from good, and coordinate with it. I am well aware how odd it must seem to some of you to hear me say that an idea is true so long as to believe it is profitable to our lives. Choose a self and stand by it. A new opinion counts as true just in proportion as it gratifies the individual's desire to assimilate the novel in his experience to his beliefs in stock. The worst thing that can happen to a good teacher is to get a bad conscience about her profession because she feels herself hopeless as a psychologist. What a teacher needs to know about psychology might almost be written on the palm of one's hand. You do not sing because you're happy because you sing. The amount of psychology which is necessary to all teachers need not be very great. Psychology saves us from mistakes. It makes us more clear as to what we are about. We gain confidence in respect to any method which we are using as soon as we believe that it has theory as well as practice at its back. In teaching, you must simply work your pupil into such a state of interest in what you are going to teach him that every other object of attention is banished from his mind. Then reveal it to him so impressively that he will remember the occasion to his dying day, and finally fill him with devouring curiosity to know what the next steps in connection with the subject are. Both thought and feeling are determinants of conduct, and the same conduct may be determined either by feeling or by thought. Ingenuity in meeting and pursuing the pupil, that tact for the concrete situation, though they are the alpha and omega of the teacher's art, are things to which psychology cannot help us in the least. Earnestness means willingness to live with energy, though energy bring pain. The science of logic never made a man reason rightly, and the science of ethics never made a man behave rightly. The most such sciences can do is to help us to catch ourselves up and check ourselves, if we start to reason or to behave wrongly, and to criticize ourselves more articulately after we have made mistakes. What would be better for us to believe? This sounds very like a definition of truth. To consider hypotheses is surely always better than to dogmatize ins blaue hinein. To give the theory plenty of rope and see if it hangs itself eventually is better tactics than to choke it off at the outset by abstract accusations of self-contradiction. If you want to change your life, do it flamboyantly and start immediately. The suspicion is in the air nowadays that the superiority of one of our formulas to another may not consist so much in its literal objectivity, as in subjective qualities like its usefulness, its elegance, or its congruity with our residual beliefs. To know an object is to lead to it through a context which the world provides. In the last analysis, then, we believe that we all know and think about and talk about the same world because we believe our percepts are possessed by us in common. Truth for us is simply a collective name for verification processes. Our theories are wedged and controlled as nothing else is. Yet sometimes alternative theoretic formulas are equally compatible with all the truths we know, and then we choose between them for subjective reasons. We choose the kind of theory to which we are already partial. We follow eleginess or economy. True ideas are those that we can assimilate, validate, corroborate, and verify. False ideas are those that we cannot. That is the practical difference it makes to us to have true ideas, that therefore is the meaning of truth, for it is all that truth is known as. Theory must mediate between all previous truths and certain new experiences. Our ideas must agree with realities, be such realities concrete or abstract. Truth lives, in fact, for the most part on a credit system. Woe to him whose beliefs play fast and loose with the order which realities follow in his experience. They will lead him nowhere or else make false connections. True is the name for whatever idea starts the verification process. Useful is the name for its completed function in experience. You make a great, very great mistake, if you think that psychology, being the science of the mind's laws, is something from which you can deduce definite programs and schemes and methods of instruction for immediate schoolroom use. To plead the organic causation of a religious state of mind, then, in refutation of its claim to possess superior spiritual value, is quite illogical and arbitrary, unless one have already worked out in advance some psychophysical theory connecting spiritual values in general with determinate sorts of physiological change. Otherwise, none of our thoughts and feelings, not even our scientific doctrines, not even our disbeliefs, could retain any value as revelations of the truth, for every one of them without exception flows from the state of their possessor's body at the time. Touch is the alpha and omega of affection. Higamous man is polygamous higamous woman monogamous. Every individual existence goes out in a lonely spasm of helpless agony. As the art of reading, after a certain stage in one's education, is the art of skipping, so the art of being wise is the art of knowing what to overlook. So long as antimilitarists propose no substitute for war's disciplinary function, no moral equivalent of war, analogous, as one might say, to the mechanical equivalent of heat, so long they fail to realize the full inwardness of the situation. Intelligence is a fixed goal with variable means of achieving it. But petitional prayer is only one department of prayer, and if we take the word in the wider sense as meaning every kind of inward communion or conversation with the power, recognized as divine, we can easily see that scientific criticism leaves it untouched. Prayer in this wide sense is the very soul and essence of religion. We and God have business with each other, and in opening ourselves to God's influence our deepest destiny is fulfilled. If things are ever to move upward, someone must take the first step, and assume the risk of it. No one who is not willing to try charity, to try non-resistance as the saint is always willing, can tell whether these methods will or will not succeed. We must frankly confess, then, using our empirical common sense and ordinary practical prejudices, that in the world that actually is, the virtues of sympathy, charity, and non-resistance may be, and often have been, manifested in excess. You will agree to this in general, for in spite of the gospel, in spite of Quakerism, in spite of Tolstoy, you believe in fighting fire with fire, in shooting down usurpers, locking up thieves, and freezing out vagabonds and swindlers. We can act as if there were a God, feel as if we were free, consider nature as if she were full of special designs, lay plans as if we were to be immortal, and we find then that these words do make a genuine difference in our moral life. Modern transcendental idealism, Emersonianism, for instance, also seems to let God evaporate into abstract ideality. Not a deity in concreto, not a superhuman person, but the immanent divinity in things, the essentially spiritual structure of the universe, is the object of the transcendentalist cult. In that address of the graduating class at Divinity College in 1838 which made Emerson famous, the frank expression of this worship of mere abstract laws was what made the scandal of the performance. An unlearned carpenter of my acquaintance once said in my hearing, "There is very little difference between one man and another, but what little there is very important." This distinction seems to me to go to the root of the matter. Few people have definitely articulated philosophies of their own, but almost everyone has his own peculiar sense of a certain total character in the universe, and of the inadequacy of fully to match it, to the peculiar systems that he knows. The most ancient parts of truth also once were plastic. They also were called true for human reasons. They also mediated between still earlier truths and what in those days were novel observations. Purely objective truth, truth in whose establishment the function of giving human satisfaction in marrying previous parts of experience with newer parts played no role whatsoever, is nowhere to be found. The reasons why we call things true is the reason why they are true, for to be true means only to perform this marriage function. The impulse to take life strivingly is indestructible in the race. The total mental efficiency of a man is the resultant of the working together of all his faculties. He is too complex a being for any one of them to have the casting vote. If any one of them do have the casting vote, it is more likely to be the strength of his desire and passion, the strength of the interest he takes in what is proposed. Concentration, memory, reasoning power, inventiveness, excellence of the senses, all are subsidiary to this. Creatures extremely low in the intellectual scale may have conception. All that is required is that they should recognize the same experience again. A polyp would be a conceptual thinker if a feeling of, hello, thingumbob again, ever flitted through its mind. Mankind's common instinct for reality has always held the world to be essentially a theater for heroism. Any object not interesting in itself may become interesting through becoming associated with an object in which an interest already exists. The most peculiar social self which one is apt to have is in the mind of the person one is in love with. The prescription is that the subject must be made to show new aspects of itself, to prompt new questions, in a word, to change. From an unchanging subject the attention inevitably wanders away. In my individual heart I fully believe my faith is as robust as yours. The trouble with your robust and full-bodied faiths, however, is that they begin to cut each other's throats too soon. And for getting on in the world and establishing a modus vivendi, these pestilential refinements and reasonablenesses and moderations have to creep in. The true, to put it very briefly, is only the expedient in the way of our thinking, just as the right is only the expedient in the way of our behaving. The aim of science is always to reduce complexity to simplicity. But facts are facts, and if we only get enough of them they are sure to combine. Asceticism may be a mere expression of organic hardihood, disgusted with too much ease. What we really need, the poets and orators I help to keep alive in us, is not, then, the common and gregarious courage which Robert Shaw showed when he marched with you, men of the 7th Regiment. It is that more lonely courage which he showed when he dropped his warm commission in the glorious 2nd to head your dubious fortunes, Negroes of the 54th. That lonely kind of courage, civic courage as we call it in times of peace, is the kind of valor to which the monuments of nations should most of all be reared. Religion, therefore, as I now ask you arbitrarily to take it, shall mean for us the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. Since the relation may be either moral, physical, or ritual, it is evident that out of religion in the sense in which we take it, theologies, philosophies, and ecclesiastical organizations may secondarily grow. We all have a lifelong habit of inferiority to our full self. The pragmatist turns away from abstraction and insufficiency, from verbal solutions, from bad a priori reasons, from fixed principles, closed systems, and pretended absolutes and origins. He turns toward concreteness and adequacy, towards facts, towards action, and towards power. Habit is thus the enormous flywheel of society, its most precious conservative agent. It alone is what keeps us all within the bounds of ordinance. Never suffer an exception to occur till the new habit is securely rooted in your life. Each lapse is like the letting fall of a ball of string which one is carefully winding up. A single slip undoes more than a great many turns will wind again. We are spinning our own fates, good or evil, never to be undone. The most anyone can do is to confess as candidly as he can the grounds for the faith that is in him, and leave his example to work on others as it may. Take the happiest man, the one most envied by the world, and in 9 cases out of 10 his inmost consciousness is one of failure. Either his ideals in the line of his achievements are pitched far higher than the achievements themselves, or else he has secret ideals of which the world knows nothing, and in regard to which he inwardly knows himself to be found wanting. The difference between the first and second best things in art absolutely seems to escape verbal definition, it is a matter of a hair, a shade, an inward quiver of some kind, yet what miles away in the point of preciousness. Thoughts become perception, perception becomes reality. Alter your thoughts, alter your reality. It is art that makes life, and I know of no substitute whatsoever for the force and beauty of its process. We are thinking beings, and we cannot exclude the intellect from participating in any of our functions. Lay plans as if we were to be immortal. The university most worthy of rational admiration is that one in which your lonely thinker can feel himself lonely, most positively furthered, and most richly fed. We need only in cold blood to act as if the thing in question were real, and it will infallibly end by growing into such a connection with our life that it will become real. The instinct of ownership is fundamental in man's nature. Habit is the great flywheel of society. All natural happiness thus seems infected with a contradiction. The breath of the sepulchre surrounds it. The lunatic's visions of horror are all drawn from the material of daily fact. The through-and-through universe seems to suffocate me with its infallible, impeccable all-pervasiveness. Its necessity, with no possibilities, its relations, with no subjects, make me feel as if I had entered into a contract with no reserved rights. It seems too buttoned up and white-chokered and clean-shaven a thing to speak for the vast slow-breathing unconscious cosmos with its dread abysses and its unknown tides. Man is essentially the imitative animal. His whole educability and in fact the whole history of civilization depend on this trait, which his strong tendencies to rivalry, jealousy, and acquisitiveness reinforce. There is but one indefectibly certain truth, and that is the truth that Pyrrhonistic skepticism itself leaves standing, the truth that the present phenomenon of consciousness exists. Our minds thus grow in spots, and like grease spots, the spots spread. But we let them spread as little as possible. We keep unaltered as much of our old knowledge, as many of our old prejudices and beliefs, as we can. We patch and tinker more than we renew. The novelty soaks in, it stains the ancient mass, but it is also tinged by what absorbs it. I do indeed disbelieve that we or any other mortal men can attain on a given day to absolutely incorrigible and unimprovable truth about such matters of fact as those with which religions deal. But I reject this dogmatic ideal not out of a perverse delight in intellectual instability. I am no lover of disorder and doubt as such. Rather do I fear to lose truth by this pretension to possess it already wholly. A paradise of inward tranquility seems to be faith's usual result. Our intelligence cannot wall itself up alive, like a pupa in a chrysalis. It must at any cost keep on speaking terms with the universe that engendered it. Philosophy, beginning in wonder, as Plato and Aristotle said, is able to fancy everything different from what it is. It sees the familiar as if it were strange, and the strange as if it were familiar. It can take things up and lay them down again. It rouses us from our native dogmatic slumber and breaks up our caked prejudices. It makes a tremendous emotional and practical difference to one whether one accepts the universe in the drab discolored way of stoic resignation to necessity, or with the passionate happiness of Christian saints. The squalid cash interpretation put on the word success is our national disease. Religions have approved themselves, they have ministered to sundry vital needs which they found reigning. When they violated other needs too strongly, or when other faiths came which served the same needs better, the first religions were supplanted. The states of consciousness are all that psychology needs to do her work with. Metaphysics or theology may prove the soul to exist, but for psychology the hypothesis of such a substantial principle of unity is superfluous. Invention, using the term most broadly, and imitation, are the two legs, so to call them, on which the human race historically has walked. The question of free will is insoluble on strictly psychological grounds. We can change our circumstances by a mere change of our attitude. We are not only gregarious animals, liking to be in sight of our fellows, but we have an innate propensity to get ourselves noticed, and noticed favorably, by our kind. When once a decision is reached and execution is the order of the day, dismiss absolutely all responsibility and care about the outcome. Science must constantly be reminded that her purposes are not the only purposes and that the order of uniform causation which she has use for, and is therefore right in postulating, may be enveloped in a wider order, on which she has no claim at all. Each of us is in fact what he is almost exclusively by virtue of his imitativeness. Habit is the enormous flywheel of society, its most precious conservative agent. There is no more miserable human being than one in whom nothing is habitual but indecision. Full half the time of such a man goes to the deciding, or regretting, of matters which ought to be so ingrained in him as practically not to exist for his consciousness at all. With mere good intentions hell is proverbially paved. There must always be a discrepancy between concepts and reality, because the former are static and discontinuous while the latter is dynamic and flowing. Most men's friendships are too inarticulate. The drunken consciousness is one bit of the mystic consciousness, and our total opinion of it must find its place in our opinion of that larger whole. 5 thinkers since Galileo, each informing his successor of what discoveries his own lifetime had seen achieved, might have passed the torch of science into our hands as we sit here in this room. Indeed, for the matter of that, an audience much smaller than the present one, an audience of some 5 or 6 score people, if each person in it could speak for his own generation, would carry us away to the black unknown of the human species, to days without a document or monument to tell their tale. With no attempt there can be no failure, with no failure no humiliation. Results should not be too voluntarily aimed at or too busily thought of. They are sure to float up of their own accord from a long enough daily work at a given matter. The greatest empiricists among us are only empiricists on reflection. When left to their instincts, they dogmatize like infallible popes. However inadequate our ideas of causal efficacy may be, we are less wide of the mark when we say that our ideas and feelings have it, than the automatists are when they say they haven't it. As in the night all cats are gray, so in the darkness of metaphysical criticism all causes are obscure. But one has no right to pull the pall over the psychic half of the subject only, whilst in the same breath one dogmatizes about material causation as if Hume, Kant, and Lotze had never been born. No decision is, in itself, a decision. The simplest rudiment of mystical experience would seem to be that deepened sense of the significance of a maxim or formula which occasionally sweeps over one. The highest flights of charity, devotion, trust, patience, bravery to which the wings of human nature have spread themselves, have been flown for religious ideals. The ultimate test of what a truth means is the conduct it dictates or inspires. Of all the beautiful truths pertaining to the soul none is more gladdening or fruitful than to know you can regenerate and make yourself what you will. In order to disprove the assertion that all crows are black, one white crow is sufficient. In its broadest term, religion says that there is an unseen order, and that our supreme good lies in rightful relations to it. A man does not cry because he is sad because he cries. There are, in us, possibilities that take our breath away, and show a world wider than either physics or Philistine ethics can imagine. Here is a world in which all is well, in spite of certain forms of death, death of hope, death of strength, death of responsibility, of fear and wrong, death of everything that paganism, naturalism and legalism pin their trust on. The word cause is an altar to an unknown God. The stream of thought flows on, but most of its segments fall into the bottomless abyss of oblivion. Of some, no memory survives the instant of their passage. Of others, it is confined to a few moments, hours or days. Others, again, leave vestiges which are indestructible, and by means of which they may be recalled as long as life endures. The most immutable barrier in nature is between one man's thoughts and another's. You can alter your life by altering the state of your mind. Man's chief difference from the brutes lies in the exuberant excess of his subjective propensities. Prune his extravagance, sober him, and you undo him. The true is the name of whatever proves itself to be good in the way of belief, and good, too, for definite, assignable reasons. Voices of the glorified urge us onward. They who have passed from the semblances of time to the realities of eternity call upon us to advance. The rest that awaits us invites us forward. We do not pine for our rest before God wills it. We long for no inglorious rest. We are thankful rather for the invaluable training of difficulty, the loving discipline of danger and strife. Yet in the midst of it all the prospect of rest invites us heavenward. Through all, and above all, God cries, "Go forward. Come up higher." I don't see how an epigram, being a bolt from the blue, with no introduction or cue, ever gets itself writ. The God of many men is little more than their court of appeal against the damnatory judgment passed on their failures by the opinion of the world. So our self-feeling in this world depends entirely on what we back ourselves to be and do. Pragmatism's only test of probable truth is what works best in the way of leading us, what fits every part of life best and combines with the collectivity of experiences demands, nothing being omitted. The bottom of being is left logically opaque to us, a datum in the strict sense of the word, something we simply come upon and find, and about which, if we wish to act, we should pause and wonder as little as possible. In this confession lies the lasting truth of empiricism. The truth remains that, after adolescence has begun, words must constitute a large part, and an always larger part as life advances, of what the human being has to learn. The trail of the human serpent is thus over everything. The work that leads to a doctor's degree is a constant temptation to sacrifice one's growth as a man to one's growth as a specialist. We have nothing to do but to receive, resting absolutely upon the merit, power, and love of our Redeemer. Everything which is demanded is by that fact a good. The first thing that intellect does with an object is to class it with something else. Every claim creates an obligation. Divinity lies all around us, but society remains too hidebound to accept that fact. The Mother Sea and the fountainhead of all religions lies in the mystical experiences of the individual. Our beliefs and our attention are the same fact. There are 3 rules to follow if you want to change. 1. Start immediately. 2. Do it flamboyantly. 3. No exceptions. Who does not see that we are likely to ascertain the distinctive significance of religious melancholy in happiness, or of religious trances? Far better by comparing them as conscientiously as we can with other varieties of melancholy, happiness, and trance, than by refusing to consider their place in any more general series, and treating them as if they were outside of nature's order altogether. Conversion is in its essence a normal adolescent phenomenon, incidental to the passage from the child's small universe to the wider intellectual and spiritual life of maturity. Marvelous as may be the power of my dog to understand my moods, deathless as his affection and fidelity, his mental state is as unsolved a mystery to me as it was to my remotest ancestor. To neglect the wise sayings of great thinkers is to deny ourselves the truest education. A great idea goes through 3 stages on its way to acceptance. 1. It is dismissed as nonsense. 2. It is acknowledged as true, but insignificant. 3. Finally, it is seen to be important, but not really anything new. Individuality is founded in feeling. If we remembered everything, we should on most occasions be as ill off as if we remembered nothing. It would take us as long to recall a space of time as it took the original time to elapse, and we should never get ahead with our thinking. All recollected times undergo, accordingly, what M. Ribot calls foreshortening, and this foreshortening is due to the omission of an enormous number of facts which filled them. In youth we may have an absolutely new experience, subjective or objective, every hour of the day. Apprehension is vivid, retentiveness strong, and our recollections of that time, like those in a time spent in rapid and interesting travel, are of something intricate, multitudinous, and long drawn out. But as each passing year converts some of this experience into automatic routine which we hardly note at all, the days and the weeks smooth themselves out in recollection to a contentless unit, and the years grow hollow and collapse. You may not get everything you dream about, but you will never get anything you don't dream about. Our acts of voluntary attending, as brief and fitful as they are nevertheless momentous and critical, determining us, as they do, to higher or lower destinies. The gist of the matter is this: every impression that comes in from without, be it a sentence which we hear, an object of vision, or an effluvium which assails our nose, no sooner enters our consciousness than it is drafted off in some determinate direction or other, making connection with the other materials already there, and finally producing what we call our reaction. The particular connections it strikes into are determined by our past experiences and the associations of the present sort of impression with them. The mind is made up by what it feeds upon. Need and struggle are what excite and inspire us. Our hour of triumph is what brings the void. Don't preach too much to your pupils or abound in good talk in the abstract. Lie in wait rather for the practical opportunities, be prompt to seize those as they pass, and thus at one operation get your pupils both to think, to feel, and to do. Success plus self-esteem equals pretensions. Our belief at the beginning of a doubtful undertaking is the one thing that assures the successful outcome of any venture. Philosophy is at once the most sublime and the most trivial of human pursuits. If there is aught of good in the style, it is the result of ceaseless toil in rewriting. Everything comes out wrong with me at first, but when once objectified I can torture and poke and scrape and pat it till it offends me no more. Truth happens to an idea. Human beings are born into this little span of life of which the best thing is its friendships and intimacies, and yet they leave their friendships and intimacies with no cultivation, to grow as they will by the roadside, expecting them to keep by force of mere inertia. Why may we not be in the universe, as our dogs and cats are in our drawing rooms and libraries? Our view of the world is truly shaped by what we decide to hear. The union of the mathematician with the poet, fervor with measure, passion with correctness, this surely is the ideal. All our life, so far as it has definite form, is but a mass of habits. If this life is not a real fight, in which something is eternally gained for the universe by success, it is no better than a game of private theatricals from which one may withdraw at will. But it feels like a real fight. The voluntary path to cheerfulness, if our spontaneous cheerfulness be lost, is to sit up cheerfully, and act and speak as if cheerfulness were already there. To feel brave, act as if we were brave, use all our will to that end, and courage will very likely replace fear. Anything you may hold firmly in your imagination can be yours. Religion is a monumental chapter in the history of human egotism. Each of us literally chooses, by his way of attending to things, what sort of universe he shall appear to himself to inhabit. My experience is what I agree to attend to. There are no differences but differences of degree between different degrees of difference and no difference. A new idea is first condemned as ridiculous and then dismissed as trivial, until finally, it becomes what everybody knows. I believe there is no source of deception in the investigation of nature which can compare with a fixed belief that certain kinds of phenomena are impossible. The deepest human need is the need to be appreciated. Our lives are like islands in the sea, or like trees in the forest. The maple and the pine may whisper to each other with their leaves, but the trees also commingle their roots in the darkness underground, and the islands also hang together through the ocean's bottom. Truth in our ideas means their power to work. Every time a resolve or fine glow of feeling evaporates without bearing fruit, it is worse than a chance lost. It works to hinder future emotions from taking the normal path of discharge. truth happens to an idea. It becomes true, is made true by events. Its verity is in fact an event, a process, the process namely of its verifying itself, its verification. Its validity is the process of its validation. Language is the most imperfect and expensive means yet discovered for communicating thought. Genius is the capacity for seeing relationships where lesser men see none. Agissai come si quel che fai, faces la differenza. La fa. I have often thought the best way to define a man's character would be to seek out the particular mental or moral attitude in which, when it comes upon him, he felt himself most deeply and intensely active and alive. At such moments there is a voice inside which speaks and says, "This is the real me." A genius is the man in whom you are least likely to find the power of attending to anything insipid or distasteful in itself. He breaks his engagements, leaves his letters unanswered, neglects his family duties incorrigibly, because he is powerless to turn his attention down and back from those more interesting trains of imagery with which his genius constantly occupies his mind. There is no worse lie than a truth misunderstood by you those who hear it. I myself believe that the evidence for God lies primarily in interpersonal experiences. Circumstance does not make me, it reveals me. Let no youth have any anxiety about the upshot of his education, whatever the line of it may be. If he keep faithfully busy each hour of the working day, he may safely leave the result to itself. He can with perfect certainty count on waking up some fine morning to find himself one of the competent ones of his generation. This overcoming of all the usual barriers between the individual and the absolute is the great mystic achievement. In mystic states we both become one with the absolute and we become aware of our oneness. This is the everlasting and triumphant mystical tradition, hardly altered by differences of clime or creed. The education of attention would be an education par excellence. Act the part and you will become the part. Tell him to live by yes and no, yes to everything good, no to everything bad. First, a new theory is attacked as absurd, then it is admitted to be true, but obvious and insignificant. Finally it is seen to be so important that its adversaries claim that they themselves discovered it. Action seems to follow feeling, but really actions and feeling go together, and by regulating the action, which is under the more direct control of the will, we can indirectly regulate the feeling, which is not. Thus the sovereign voluntary path to cheerfulness, if our cheerfulness be lost, is to sit up cheerfully and to act and speak as if cheerfulness were already there. The function of ignoring, of inattention, is as vital a factor in mental progress as the function of attention itself. The transition from tenseness, self-responsibility, and worry, to equanimity, receptivity, and peace, is the most wonderful of all those shiftings of inner equilibrium. Those changes of personal center of energy, which I have analyzed so often, and the chief wonder of it is that it so often comes about, not by doing, but by simply relaxing and throwing the burden down. The deepest longing in the human breast is the desire for appreciation. Keep the faculty of effort alive in you by a little gratuitous exercise every day. All our scientific and philosophic ideals are altars to unknown gods. Man lives by habits indeed, but what he lives for is thrill and excitements. From time immemorial war has been the supremely thrilling excitement. A new position of responsibility will usually show a man to be a far stronger creature than was supposed. There is a law in psychology that if you form a picture in your mind of what you would like to be, and you keep and hold that picture there long enough, you will soon become exactly as you have been thinking. A purely disembodied human emotion is a nonentity. Life feels like a real fight, as if there were something really wild in the universe which we, with all our idealities and faithfulnesses, are needed to redeem. There is nothing so absurd that it cannot be believed as truth if repeated often enough. I am done with great things and big things, great institutions and big success, and I am for those tiny, invisible molecular moral forces that work from individual to individual, creeping through the crannies of the world like so many rootlets, or like the capillary oozing of water, yet which if you give them time, will rend the hardest monuments of man's pride. In the practical use of our intellect, forgetting is as important as remembering. The essence of genius is to know what to overlook. Formula to live your dream: 1. Be bold. 2. Begin now. 3. No exceptions. Effort is the one strictly undervalued and original contribution we make to this world. There is a stream, a succession of states, or waves, or fields, or whatever you please to call them, of knowledge, of feeling, of desire, of deliberation, etc., that constantly pass and repass, and that constitute our inner life. Man lives in only one small room of the enormous house of his consciousness. Belief creates the actual fact. So it is with children who learn to read fluently and well. They begin to take flight into whole new worlds as effortlessly as young birds take to the sky. The greatest weapon we have to combat stress is the ability to choose our thoughts. The exercise of prayer, in those who habitually exert it, must be regarded by us doctors as the most adequate and normal of all the pacifiers of the mind and commerce of the nerves. A difference which makes no difference is no difference at all. My first act of free will shall be to believe in free will. Effort is a measure of a man. It is your friends who make your world. A man may not achieve everything he has dreamed, but he will never achieve anything great without having dreamed it first. The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention, over and over again, is the very root of judgment, character, and will. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. Lives based on having are less free than lives based either on doing or being. Most of us can learn to live in perfect comfort on higher levels of power. Everyone knows that on any given day there are energies slumbering in him which the incitements of that day do not call forth. Compared with what we ought to be, we are only half awake. It is evident that our organism has stored up reserves of energy that are ordinarily not called upon, deeper and deeper strata of explosible material, ready for use by anyone who probes so deep. The human individual usually lives far within his limits. We forget that every good that is worth possessing must be paid for in strokes of daily effort. In business for yourself, not by yourself. The good or bad is not in the circumstance, but only in the mind that encounters it. We may be in the universe as dogs and cats are in our libraries, seeing the books and hearing the conversation, but having no inkling of the meaning of it all. To leap across an abyss, one is better served by faith than doubt. The good we do today becomes the happiness of tomorrow. The mind, in short, works on the data it receives very much as the sculptor works on his block of stone. Real servants don't try to use God for their purposes. They let God use them for His purposes. The whole drift of my education goes to persuade me that the world of our present consciousness is only one out of many worlds of consciousness that exist. The strenuous life tastes better. The last peculiarity of consciousness to which attention is to be drawn in this first rough description of its stream is that it is always interested more in one part of its object than in another, and welcomes and rejects, or chooses, all the while it thinks. Everyone knows that on any given day there are energies slumbering in him which the incitements of that day do not call forth. Compared with what we ought to be, we are only half awake. The human individual usually lives far within his limits. If it works, it's true. Beyond the very extreme of fatigue and distress, we may find amounts of ease and power we never dreamed ourselves to own. Sources of strength never taxed at all because we never pushed through the obstruction. The discovery of the power of our thoughts will prove to be the most important discovery of our time. Feed the growing human being, feed him with the sort of experience for which from year to year he shows a natural craving, and he will develop in adult life a sounder sort of mental tissue, even though he may seem to be wasting a great deal of his growing time, in the eyes of those for whom the only channels of learning are books and verbally communicated information. Positive images of the future are a powerful and magnetic force. They draw us on and energize us, give us courage and will to take on important initiatives. Negative images of the future also have a magnetism. They pull the spirit downward in the path of despair. The study a posteriori of the distribution of consciousness shows it to be exactly such as we might expect in an organ added for the sake of steering a nervous system grown too complex to regulate itself. Truth is something that happens to an idea. A thing is important if anyone think it important. Give your dreams all you've got, and you'll be amazed at the energy that comes out of you. Most people live, whether physically, intellectually or morally, in a very restricted circle of their potential being. Fear of life in one form or another is the great thing to exorcise. If you want a confidence, act as if you already have it. Try the as-if technique. The attitude of unhappiness is not only painful, it is mean and ugly. Habit simplifies our movements, makes them accurate, and diminishes fatigue. Men habitually use only a small part of the power which they actually possess. As we take, in fact, a general view of the wonderful stream of our consciousness, what strikes us first is this different pace of its parts. Like a bird's life, it seems to be made of an alternation of flights and perchings. The great thing, then, in all education, is to make our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy. The minute a man ceases to grow, no matter what his years, that minute he begins to be old. He who refuses to embrace a unique opportunity loses the prize as surely as if he had failed. Pessimism leads to weakness, optimism to power. There is a voice inside which speaks and says, "This is the real me." Our lives are like islands in the sea, or like trees in the forest, which commingle their roots in the darkness underground. One of the greatest discoveries of our time is that a man can alter the state of their life by altering the state of their mind. The path to cheerfulness is to sit cheerfully and to act and speak as if cheerfulness were already there. The sovereign cure for worry is prayer. In any project, the important factor is your belief. Without belief, there can be no successful outcome. Wisdom is learning what to overlook. Most unhappiness is caused because people listen to themselves, instead of talking to themselves. A sense of humor is just common sense dancing. Whilst part of what we perceive comes through our senses from the object before us, another part, and it may be the larger part, always comes out of our own mind. Deepest principle of human nature is to be appreciated. Your hopes, dreams and aspirations are legitimate. They are trying to take you airborne, above the clouds, above the storms, if you only let them. You can be an artist without visual images, a reader without eyes, a mass of erudition with a bad elementary memory. In almost any subject, your passion for the subject will save you. If you only care enough for a result, you will almost certainly attain it. If you wish to be rich, you will be rich. If you wish to be learned, you will be learned. If you wish to be good, you will be good. Only you must, then, really wish these things, and wish them with exclusiveness, and not wish at the same time 100 other incompatible things just as strongly. We are like islands in the sea, separate on the surface but connected in the deep. The great use of life is to spend it for something that will outlast it. This life is worth living, we can say, since it is what we make it. Believe that life is worth living and your belief will help create the fact. Whenever two people meet, there are really 6 people present. There is each man as he sees himself, each man as the other person sees him, and each man as he really is. From the Vedas we learn a practical art of surgery, medicine, music, house building, under which mechanized art is included. They are encyclopedia of every aspect of life, culture, religion, science, ethics, law, cosmology and meteorology. The great use of life is to spend it for something that will outlast it. For the moment, what we attend to is reality. If you can change your mind, you can change your life. To kill time is not murder, it's suicide.